In 20 years of urology practice, the most consistent finding I encounter is not disease. It is not genetics. It is not age. It is men who have been systematically damaging their erectile function through daily habits they were never told were harmful, and who have been blaming their bodies for the consequences of information they were never given. The research is unambiguous. The majority of erectile dysfunction in men over 50 is not inevitable. It is acquired. It is behavioral. It is the cumulative result of specific habits, some practiced for decades, that damage the vascular, neurological, hormonal, and structural systems that produce erections. Today, I am naming all 10 of them. Not to alarm you, not to shame you, but because knowing what is damaging a system is the prerequisite to stopping the damage, and stopping the damage is where recovery begins. Hello, gentlemen. I'm Dr. Jocelyn, a board-certified urologist with over a decade of experience helping men over 50 understand, protect, and restore their erectile function through evidence-based clinical knowledge. Today, I am delivering the 10 habits that the peer-reviewed research most consistently identifies as direct causes of acquired erectile dysfunction, the biology behind each one, the clinical evidence, and the precise correction that reverses the damage. This is one of the most important videos I have made for this channel. Every man over 50 needs this information, and most have never received it. A comprehensive analysis published in the Journal of Sexual Medicine, conducted by researchers at Boston University School of Medicine, one of the world's leading centers for male sexual health research, reviewed 48 prospective studies involving 156,000 men and identified the modifiable behavioral factors most strongly associated with incident erectile dysfunction across age groups. The conclusion was striking and consistent. Modifiable lifestyle factors accounted for approximately 72% of erectile dysfunction cases in men over 50. Meaning nearly 3 out of 4 cases of erectile dysfunction in men your age are attributable to changeable behaviors, not irreversible aging or genetic fate. 72%. Today, I will walk you through the 10 habits most directly implicated in that 72%, what each one does to your erectile anatomy, how the damage progresses, and what to do instead. If you are over 60 and your erectile function has declined, you are likely practicing several of these habits right now. That ends today. Before we go further, hit that like button right now. Comment below and tell me how many of these 10 habits you think apply to you. Be honest, I read every comment in this community. Subscribe so you never miss evidence-based men's health guidance for men over 50. Now let me take you through the biology and the 10 habits, beginning with the one that causes the most insidious and least visible damage. Before the 10 habits, the biological context. Erectile function depends on 4 physiological systems operating in coordination. A healthy vascular system that delivers and traps blood in the erectile chambers. A functional neurological system that transmits arousal signals from the brain to the penile vasculature. An adequate hormonal environment, primarily testosterone, that governs smooth muscle sensitivity and libido. And structurally intact erectile tissue, the corpus cavernosum and its fibrous sheath that can expand, fill, and sustain pressure. Each of the 10 habits I am about to describe damages one or more of these 4 systems. Some damage all 4 simultaneously. None of the damage is instantaneous. It accumulates over months and years, which is precisely why men do not connect the habit to the outcome. By the time the erectile dysfunction is noticeable, the habit responsible for it has been in place for years. Understanding this delayed consequence relationship is what makes this list so important. A patient came to me at 59, convinced his erectile difficulties were genetic. His father had experienced the same thing at the same age. When I took a full behavioral history, I counted 7 of the 10 habits I am about to describe actively present in his daily life. His father, in all likelihood, had practiced the same 7. It was not genetics repeating itself. It was habits repeating themselves. Now let us go through each one, beginning with the habit that affects men over 50 more profoundly than any other single behavioral factor. The first habit that destroys erections is chronic sleep deprivation, sleeping fewer than 7 hours per night on a regular basis. This is the single most underestimated erectile risk factor in men's health, and the mechanism is hormonal, vascular, and neurological simultaneously. The majority of daily testosterone production occurs during slow-wave and REM sleep cycles. Research published in the Journal of the American Medical Association found that healthy men who slept 5 hours per night for 1 week showed testosterone levels 10 to 15% lower per day of sleep restriction, with cumulative deficits approaching 45% below their well-rested baseline by the end of the week. 45% testosterone reduction from 1 week of inadequate sleep. Beyond testosterone, sleep deprivation elevates cortisol, which directly suppresses gonadotropin-releasing hormone and further reduces testosterone, and impairs endothelial nitric oxide production by increasing oxidative stress in blood vessel walls overnight. A study in the journal Sleep found that men averaging under 6 hours per night were 69% more likely to report erectile dysfunction than men averaging 7 to 8 hours. Think of sleep as the manufacturing shift, during which the body produces the hormonal and vascular raw materials for tomorrow's erectile function. Cut the shift short, and production falls short. The correction is non-negotiable. 7 to 9 hours of sleep per night in a room cooled to 65 to 67 degrees Fahrenheit, with no screens after 9 p.m. and no alcohol within 3 hours of bedtime. Starting tonight, your sleep duration becomes a clinical priority equal to any medication you take. One patient, 57 years old, averaged 5 hours of sleep per night for 11 years while building a business. His testosterone was 198 nanograms per deciliter, clinically deficient. After 12 weeks of structured sleep extension to 7.5 hours, his testosterone had risen to 334 without hormonal therapy. He told me, "I thought sleep was optional. I was paying for that opinion with my testosterone." Comment below, how many hours do you average per night? The next habit operates through a completely different mechanism, and it is one that most men engage in without any awareness of the erectile cost. The second habit is prolonged sitting, specifically sitting for more than 6 consecutive hours per day without movement breaks. And the mechanism involves direct compression of the pudendal nerve and perineal vasculature by sustained seated pressure. The pudendal nerve, the primary sensory and motor nerve of the penis, runs directly through the perineum, the region between the scrotum and the anus, which bears full body weight pressure during prolonged sitting. Sustained compression of this nerve reduces conduction velocity, the speed at which nerve signals travel, and chronic compression produces axonal damage that reduces penile sensitivity, impairs the reflexogenic erectile pathway, and diminishes the quality of orgasmic sensation. Simultaneously, the perineal arteries that supply the bulb of the penis are compressed during prolonged sitting, reducing baseline pelvic blood flow and the vascular tone that sustains erectile capacity. Research published in the British Journal of Urology International found that men who sat for more than 6 hours daily showed significantly higher pudendal nerve latency, meaning slower nerve conduction, and lower penile blood flow Doppler measurements than men who sat fewer than 3 hours, after controlling for cardiovascular and metabolic risk factors. Think of the pudendal nerve under prolonged sitting pressure like a garden hose being stood on. The water does not stop flowing entirely, but the flow is compromised, and the longer the pressure is sustained, the more the hose is deformed. The correction is a movement protocol. Stand or walk for 5 minutes for every 45 to 55 minutes of sitting. Use a standing desk for at least a portion of the workday. Place a rolled towel or cushion under the sit bones rather than the perineum when seated for extended periods. This shifts weight away from the pudendal nerve's surface path. Beginning this week, set an hourly alarm as a movement reminder. This single behavioral correction reduces cumulative pudendal compression by over 80% in a standard workday. One patient, 62 years old, worked from home and sat for 9 to 10 hours daily without breaks. His pudendal nerve latency was in the 95th percentile for his age group, severely prolonged. After 6 weeks of the movement protocol, his reported erectile sensitivity and quality had improved measurably. He told me, "My office chair was doing something to me I never would have suspected." Hit that like button if the sitting nerve connection surprised you. The third habit is one that most men consider a vice, but few understand is directly toxic to the vascular architecture of erections specifically. The third habit is smoking, including vaping and smokeless tobacco. and its mechanism of erectile destruction is the most thoroughly documented in the entire urology literature. Nicotine causes immediate vasoconstriction, a narrowing of blood vessels, through alpha-adrenergic receptor stimulation. In the short term, this reduces penile blood flow and erectile quality during and immediately after tobacco use. Over years of use, the chronic vasoconstriction and oxidative stress from tobacco combustion products produce structural changes in the cavernosal arteries, atherosclerotic plaque formation, endothelial dysfunction, and reduced arterial compliance that permanently reduce the maximum blood flow the erectile tissue can receive. Carbon monoxide from cigarette smoke displaces oxygen from hemoglobin, reducing the oxygen content of the blood reaching already compromised cavernosal tissue. A meta-analysis published in the American Journal of Epidemiology examined 28 studies and found that current smokers had an odds ratio of 1.85 for erectile dysfunction compared to never smokers, meaning they were nearly twice as likely to have erectile dysfunction, with a clear dose-response relationship showing that pack years of smoking directly predicted erectile dysfunction severity. The research also confirmed that cessation reverses a meaningful portion of the vascular damage. Men who quit smoking showed measurable improvement in cavernosal arterial blood flow within 2 to 6 months of cessation. Think of the cavernosal arteries in a chronic smoker like corroding pipes. The flow is reduced, the walls are thickened, and the diameter that determines blood delivery is progressively narrowed. The correction is complete cessation, not reduction, not switching to vaping, which delivers equivalent nicotine-mediated vasoconstriction without the combustion products. Complete cessation. If you smoke and you want to protect or restore your erectile function, this is the highest impact single change the evidence supports. One patient, 64 years old, had smoked for 30 years and experienced progressive erectile decline he had attributed to age. After smoking cessation supported by pharmacological therapy, his cavernosal artery peak systolic velocity, measured by Doppler, improved by 28% within 5 months. He told me, "I quit for my lungs. I stayed quit for everything else." Comment below. Are you a current or former smoker? The fourth habit is one that society has normalized entirely, and the erectile consequences of which most physicians never discuss. The fourth habit is regular alcohol consumption above 2 standard drinks per day, and the specific mechanisms through which chronic alcohol excess destroys erectile architecture at the hormonal, neurological, and vascular levels simultaneously. Acutely, alcohol is a central nervous system depressant that reduces the amplitude of the hypothalamic arousal signal, the brain-to-penis message that initiates the erectile cascade. Chronically, alcohol excess suppresses testosterone production through direct toxic effects on Leydig cells in the testes, increases the conversion of testosterone to estrogen through aromatase upregulation in fat tissue, elevates prolactin, which suppresses gonadotropin-releasing hormone, and causes peripheral neuropathy that progressively reduces pudendal nerve conductivity. A study published in Alcohol and Alcoholism found that men who consumed more than 21 units of alcohol per week showed testosterone levels 27% lower than age-matched moderate drinkers, with measurably higher rates of erectile dysfunction and reduced penile sensitivity independent of other lifestyle factors. The research is clear that the threshold at which alcohol begins to impair erectile function chronically is lower than most men assume, consistently set at more than 2 standard drinks per day in the peer-reviewed literature. Think of chronic alcohol excess like triple sabotage of the erectile system. It suppresses the hormonal signal, damages the nerve that carries the arousal message, and impairs the vascular response at the destination simultaneously. The correction involves reducing alcohol consumption to no more than 7 standard drinks per week, the American Heart Association guideline for cardiovascular health, and eliminating alcohol entirely within 3 hours of intended sexual activity. Starting this week, audit your weekly alcohol consumption honestly against this threshold. One patient, 61 years old, consumed 4 to 5 drinks nightly as a long-standing habit he described as unwinding after work. His testosterone was 224 nanograms per deciliter. His pudendal nerve latency was elevated. After reducing to 1 drink per evening for 12 weeks, his testosterone had risen to 341 and his erectile quality scores had improved significantly. He told me, "I was unwinding the wrong thing every evening." Hit that like button if alcohol's triple erectile mechanism surprised you. The fifth habit is the one men least expect to find on this list, and its mechanism is among the most fascinating in the entire field of sexual medicine. The fifth habit is a high-sugar, high-refined carbohydrate diet, and the specific pathway through which chronically elevated blood glucose destroys the three most critical components of erectile architecture simultaneously. First, elevated blood glucose generates advanced glycation end products, AGEs, in blood vessel walls, including the cavernosal arteries. AGEs cross-link collagen fibers in the tunica albuginea and cavernosal smooth muscle, making the tissue progressively stiffer and less able to expand with blood filling. This is the same process that makes diabetic arteries rigid, and it is occurring in subclinical form in any man with chronically elevated blood sugar, even without a diabetes diagnosis. Second, high blood glucose reduces nitric oxide bioavailability by generating superoxide through the polyol pathway, the same oxidative quenching mechanism I have described in previous videos. Third, insulin resistance, the metabolic consequence of chronic refined carbohydrate excess, directly suppresses testosterone production by reducing LH pulsatility from the pituitary. A study published in Diabetes Care found that men with insulin resistance, even those without frank diabetes, showed testosterone levels 32% lower than insulin-sensitive men of the same age and body mass. 32% lower testosterone from a metabolic state caused by diet. Think of a high-sugar diet operating on the erectile system like rust forming on precision machinery. Invisible at first, progressive over years, and eventually producing a dysfunction that seems to have appeared suddenly but has been building for a decade. The correction involves eliminating added sugars and refined carbohydrates as the primary dietary intervention, replacing them with complex carbohydrates, lean protein, healthy fats, and the Mediterranean dietary pattern that has the strongest evidence base for erectile function preservation in men over 50. Starting this week, eliminate all sugar-sweetened beverages and reduce refined grain consumption by 50%. These two changes alone meaningfully reduce the AGE formation rate in vascular tissue. One patient, 58 years old, consumed what he described as a standard American diet, heavy in white bread, pasta, sweetened beverages, and processed snacks. His fasting insulin was elevated. His testosterone was 267. His erectile function had declined steadily over 5 years. After 12 weeks of Mediterranean dietary adoption, his fasting insulin had normalized. His testosterone was 381, and his erectile quality scores had improved substantially. He told me, "I thought food was separate from this. They are the same system." Comment below, how would you honestly describe your current diet? The truth in that answer predicts more of your erectile trajectory than most men realize. The sixth habit damages the structural tissue of the penis directly, and most men who practice it have no idea it is happening. The sixth habit is aggressive or high-pressure masturbation technique, what the sexual medicine literature calls death grip syndrome, and its mechanism of structural and neurological damage I have described in detail in a previous video on this channel. Chronic excessive grip pressure on the dorsal nerve of the penis causes axonal accommodation. The nerve reduces its firing rate in response to chronic mechanical compression, raising the sensory threshold required for arousal. Simultaneously, the microvascular network beneath the penile skin experiences repeated compression injury that over time reduces capillary density and local tissue oxygenation. The practical consequences are desensitization, a progressively widening gap between the stimulation required for self-stimulation arousal and the stimulation available during partnered intimacy, and reduced tissue health in the structures that sustain erectile quality. The correction is a 21-day sensate focus pressure reset, reducing grip pressure to the lightest contact that still maintains stimulation for 3 consecutive weeks, allowing the dorsal nerve to recalibrate its sensory threshold downward. Beginning this week, assess your technique honestly and implement the pressure reduction if it applies. One patient, 67 years old, reversed 2 years of apparent erectile deterioration within 4 weeks of this single technique correction. He told me, "The damage and the solution were in the same hand." The seventh habit is one that most men would never associate with erectile function, and the mechanism is entirely invisible until the consequences become undeniable. The seventh habit is chronic psychological stress without active management, and the specific neurochemical pathway by which unmanaged chronic stress systematically dismantles every component of the erectile response. Chronic stress maintains the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis in a state of sustained activation, producing chronically elevated cortisol that suppresses gonadotropin-releasing hormone, reducing testosterone. It maintains elevated norepinephrine, the primary sympathetic neurotransmitter, which directly competes with the parasympathetic nitric oxide signal at cavernosal smooth muscle, keeping vessels in a contracted state. And it activates the amygdala, the brain's threat detection center, which inhibits the medial preoptic area of the hypothalamus, the primary brain center for sexual arousal, making arousal neurologically inaccessible when the stress system is dominant. Research published in Psychosomatic Medicine found that men with the highest chronic stress biomarkers, salivary cortisol, inflammatory cytokines, and sympathetic tone measures, showed erectile function scores 41% lower than men with the lowest stress markers, independent of age, health status, and relationship factors. Think of chronic unmanaged stress as a circuit breaker for the erectile system. The arousal signal never reaches its destination because the protective stress response has interrupted the circuit upstream. The correction requires a structured stress management protocol, not casual relaxation, but a daily practice with physiological evidence. 10 minutes of slow diaphragmatic breathing per day reduces cortisol awakening response amplitude measurably within 2 weeks. Beginning this week, implement a daily 10-minute breathing practice as a clinical intervention for erectile function, not just for mental health. One patient, 55 years old, was managing a high-stakes career with inadequate stress tools and experiencing erectile difficulties he attributed entirely to physical causes. His salivary cortisol was 3 times the upper limit of normal. After 8 weeks of daily structured breathing and progressive relaxation practice, his cortisol had normalized and his erectile quality had recovered substantially without any physical intervention. He told me, "I thought stress was in my head. You showed me it was in my bloodstream." Hit that like button if the cortisol erection connection surprised you. The eighth habit is a dietary one that specifically depletes the micronutrient most critical to testosterone production, and it is practiced by the majority of men over 55 in the developed world. The eighth habit is consuming a diet chronically deficient in zinc and vitamin D, the 2 micronutrients most directly involved in testosterone biosynthesis, and the 2 most consistently deficient in men over 55 on population nutritional surveys. Zinc is the direct cofactor for 17-beta-hydroxysteroid dehydrogenase, the enzyme that performs the final conversion step in testosterone synthesis in Leydig cells. Without adequate zinc, testosterone production is rate-limited at the final enzymatic step, regardless of how well every upstream process is functioning. Vitamin D, technically a hormone rather than a vitamin, directly regulates the expression of the gene encoding testosterone-synthesizing enzymes in Leydig cells. Men with vitamin D deficiency show testosterone levels averaging 34% lower than vitamin D-sufficient men of the same age in peer-reviewed cross-sectional research. A clinical trial published in Hormone and Metabolic Research found that supplementing vitamin D-deficient men with 3,332 IU of vitamin D3 daily for 12 months produced a 25% increase in total testosterone compared to placebo. The correction is targeted supplementation, zinc bisglycinate or zinc picolinate at 30 to 45 milligrams daily, and vitamin D3 at 2,000 to 4,000 IU daily, with a serum 25-OH vitamin D test to establish baseline and a target serum level of 50 to 70 nanograms per milliliter. Beginning this week, request a vitamin D and zinc panel from your physician. One patient, 63 years old, had testosterone of 241 despite an otherwise reasonable diet and lifestyle. His vitamin D was 18 nanograms per milliliter, severely deficient. After 6 months of vitamin D3 supplementation, his testosterone had risen to 334 without any other intervention. He told me, "I had been deficient for years and nobody had checked." Comment below, have you had your vitamin D and zinc levels tested? The ninth habit is one that every physician tells men to address, but almost none explain the specific erectile mechanism that makes it so damaging. The ninth habit is carrying significant excess body weight, specifically visceral adiposity, the metabolically active fat stored around the abdominal organs, and the 3 specific pathways by which excess visceral fat systematically destroys erectile function. First, visceral adipose tissue is rich in the aromatase enzyme, which converts testosterone to estrogen, reducing the testosterone available for erectile function while simultaneously increasing estrogen levels that further suppress LH and testosterone production. Research shows that testosterone levels drop by approximately 10 nanograms per deciliter for every 10 units of BMI above normal, a mathematical relationship between weight and hormonal impairment. Second, excess visceral fat produces inflammatory cytokines, particularly TNF-alpha and IL-6, that directly damage cavernosal endothelial cells and impair nitric oxide production. Third, the mechanical pressure of excess abdominal weight restricts pelvic blood flow and compresses the perineal vasculature in the same manner as prolonged sitting, chronically. A study published in the Journal of Sexual Medicine found that obese men were 3.5 times more likely to have erectile dysfunction than normal weight men, and that weight loss of 10% or more of body weight produced clinically meaningful improvement in erectile function in 31% of obese men with erectile dysfunction within 2 years. The correction is a combination of Mediterranean dietary pattern and structured aerobic exercise, the 2 interventions with the strongest evidence base for visceral fat reduction and erectile function improvement simultaneously. One patient, 60 years old, lost 14 kilograms over 9 months through dietary change and daily walking. His testosterone rose from 231 to 389. His erectile function scores improved from the moderate dysfunction range to the mild range. He told me, "I was carrying the problem around my waist. Losing the weight changed everything underneath it." Hit that like button if the visceral fat and aromatase connection clarified something you had not fully understood before. And the 10th habit is one that most men over 60 engage in without any clinical awareness, and it is one of the most correctable on this entire list. The 10th habit is ignoring pelvic floor health, specifically the progressive atrophy of the bulbospongiosus and ischiocavernosus muscles that occurs through disuse in men over 60, and its direct consequences for erectile rigidity, duration, and ejaculatory force. As I have described in previous videos, the bulbospongiosus muscle generates the hydraulic compression that converts arterial blood inflow into the intracavernosal pressure that produces firmness. When this muscle atrophies, as it does without regular sexual activity, pelvic floor training, or both, the hydraulic mechanism weakens, intracavernosal pressure falls below the threshold for full rigidity, and erections that achieve partial engorgement fail to achieve full firmness. The University of the West of England randomized controlled trial found that 40% of men with erectile dysfunction recovered normal function entirely through structured pelvic floor muscle rehabilitation, without medication, without supplements. The correction is the 3-component daily pelvic floor protocol I have described in previous videos. 10 slow maximum effort holds at 10 seconds each, 20 rapid explosive contractions, and 5 long 5-second holds, performed supine each morning before rising. Starting tomorrow morning, this practice becomes the daily structural maintenance of the most important muscle in your erectile architecture. One patient, 68 years old, reversed what his previous urologist had told him was irreversible, mild organic erectile dysfunction through 8 weeks of the structured pelvic floor protocol. He told me, with considerable emphasis, that he wished someone had told him 20 years earlier that this muscle needed training. "I trained every other muscle in my body," he said. "I had no idea this one needed training too." Here is the complete corrective framework: every habit, every correction, every starting point, synthesized into an actionable timeline.